Reincarnation, why, where, and how we have lived before. It is surprising how many famous people subscribe to this belief, a belief held by persons in every walk of life. On arriving in America for the first time, Albert Schweitzer was met by a large group of admirers. He addressed them saying, "Ladies and gentlemen, in my youth I was a stupid young man. I learnt German and French, Latin and Greek and Hebrew, but no English. In my next incarnation, English shall be my first language." Schweitzer, confronted with the appalling problems of lepers in his settlement, believed that the only teaching was that of reincarnation, which could make sense to them. Only future rebirth into a better body could compensate the leper for the sufferings of this life. But it is in the ranks of the poets that we find most reincarnationists. You and I grew up with the poetry of John Masefield. He was Poet Laureate of England for a long, long time. He wrote, "I hold that when a person dies, his soul returns again to earth. Arrayed in some new flesh disguise, another mother gives him birth. With sturdier limbs and brighter brain, the old soul takes the road again." The words of John Masefield. Just among the poets alone, we have many names who subscribe to this belief. The German poet Goethe was one. William Wordsworth gave us that lovely poem, Intimations of Immortality, in which he tells us how children come out of the heaven world trailing clouds of glory. He tells how they bring with them memories of previous lives and hints of the powers they had elaborated in them. Wordsworth believed that in the act of being born, we forget all that has gone before. The soul that rises with us, our life's star, hath had elsewhere its setting, and cometh from afar. But not all men entirely forget that they have lived before. Not in entire forgetfulness, and not in utter nakedness do we come, but trailing clouds of glory. Heaven lies about us in our infancy. Then there was Lord Alfred Tennyson, another poet laureate, and the American poet Walt Whitman, and many others. My friend Barbara Cartland, the author of course, is a reincarnationist. She was Edmund Burke, the orator, in a previous life. And Margaret Thatcher. She was Edward, the Black Prince, who won his spurs at Poitiers. I said in 1978 that she would make a wonderful leader, and I forecast then, during my public lectures, that she would win election after election. Those who oppose the matter of reincarnation offer powerful criticisms. If we live after death, they ask, where do we live between lives? What do we live in? Why do we have to live again? There are logical answers to all these questions. Now, Peter Sellers, a former patient of mine, not only asked the questions, for he was a reincarnationist, but he had the answers given him in a strange way. In 1964, he experienced clinical death. He was lying in a Los Angeles clinic with a heart attack. Clinical death occurred. In this condition, the output of blood from the heart ceases. The brain, deprived of oxygen, stops its activities. Unless circulation is restored, the patient remains dead. During this state of clinical death, Peter told me he left his body and found himself in another world. He was out of the body in a place that was as real and meaningful as this one. It changed him forever. Carl Jung, the great psychiatrist, experienced the same phenomenon 20 years earlier. He was an eminent scientist. He was a trained observer of human behavior, and his testimony must be taken as unimpeachable. He died on an operating table in Switzerland. While his heart was being injected with camphor drugs, he had an out-of-body experience. he described how he found himself high above the earth. Looking down, he could see on his left-hand side the whole peninsula of Arabia. On his right, he could see, stretched out, the whole subcontinent of India. He calculated later that he must have been about 1,000 miles above the earth during this experience. He said that he was about to enter a temple-like structure there, where he expected to meet friends and relatives long since dead. When the camphor drugs injected into his heart began to work, and he was pulled back into his physical body. This experience of finding yourself out of the body, by whatever means, during sleep, as a victim of an accident, in clinical death, answers some of the difficulties about reincarnation. It suggests that we can survive death, and in other states of consciousness and on other planes of being. More about this later. In 1959, a poll of the English people suggested that about 12% of the population accepted the idea of rebirth. The poll was held again in 1979, and by then the 12% had risen to 28%. By the turn of the century, I expect 50%, half of the population of Great Britain, to accept the proposition of reincarnation. Certainly more than half the whole population of the world accepts it at this moment. In the Orient, of course, the vast majority accept rebirth, where it is a powerful, everyday philosophy, almost a way of life. The East has provided much of our knowledge about laws that affect how and when and where we are reborn. For all our scientific research, for all the billions that we spend on our colleges and universities, there still remain 5 great questions unanswered. Questions that have pestered humanity down through the ages. Who are we here on earth? Where do we come from? Where do we go to from here? Why are we here at all? And why do we have to suffer pain? I've been through 4 universities, and I've never had an answer coming anywhere close to these questions. Some may say, well, it's something to do with the soul. Church teachings only confuse the matter further. It's a common belief that the idea of the soul began with Christianity. It did nothing of the sort. The soul, of course, that immortal part of us that lives on between lives, is the higher self. In esoteric circles we call him the wise old man, the Ancient of Days. 600 years before Christianity, Socrates and Plato both spoke of the existence of the soul. They said that the soul was ever on a journey, struggling to reach its goal, the goal of truth, beauty, and goodness. We as human personalities don in each life a new body and then discard it. We can help or hinder the soul in its journey. Now, the continuance of the soul requires many lives on earth. The soul is supported by the factor of reincarnation in its struggle to reach perfection. No one is obliterated at death. The beauty in us, the goodness in us, the truth in us lives on in the soul. We are gods in the making. Despite this, in the year 553 AD, the Fifth Ecumenical Council of the Roman Catholic Church examined this duad of propositions. The council eventually accepted the concept of the soul, but the proposition of reincarnation was anathematized. It was rejected out of hand. It was considered dangerous to put off till tomorrow what could be done in this life. Thus the soul was left unsupported by its sister doctrine. Today few people accept the soul as having any sort of reality. Instead, there is everywhere an egotism that lays emphasis on the personality. In a straight fight, the line of personality always defeats the unicorn of the soul in the hurly-burly of everyday life. There is always this egotism that hides the quiet voice of the soul and triumphs until man takes his last breath. Christianity has done her work well. She has preached the existence of heaven so that everybody wants to go there, but nobody wants to die, and that's the only way we can get there. And so we have contradictions. When we are born, we are told that we have sinned by the very act. We have sinned against the divine, born into sin, bastards, illegitimates, and so on. Similarly, when we die, we are told we will go to hell or to purgatory or become damned, and so on. And millions live by this kind of rubbish. Then there's this nonsense about the resurrection, that someday the trumpets will blow and our physical bodies will get up out of the grave and march off into the sunset. Shakespeare wrote of death that we are all on a journey to the undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveller ever returns. The undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveller ever returns. Now I'm going to suggest that perhaps you are going to take such a journey in real life. Let us say that you are being transferred, your company is sending you to Outer Mongolia, and that this is going to happen in the next 3 months or so. What would you do about it? Well, unless you were a complete fool, you'd make proper preparations for your journey abroad, your journey to this far-flung country. You would examine your passport and see if you needed a visa. You might find out if your Barclay card could function in Outer Mongolia. What letter of credit would you need there? Where would you stay? Was there a Holiday Inn available? Perhaps you'd take along a few packets of Thai food tea just in case. You would want to know something of the laws governing that country. Anyone would. Well, we're all of us, going on such a journey. It's far more certain than the one I have just mentioned, this journey to the undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveller ever returns. Now, what do we do about it? We generally do absolutely nothing about it. We make no preparations at all. We ignore the whole matter and feel safer. When we come to the 5 great questions, man is like an ostrich, who, fearing to observe the truth for himself, sticks his head in the sand and pretends it doesn't exist. To broach the great truths of life, I'm going to have to draw on teachings that come from ancient cultures, where reincarnation is not a new thing, where laws governing rebirth are well understood. I'm going to call on the mysteries of Greece and Rome, on the Egyptian Book of the Dead, call on the mythology of India and the Tibetan Book of the Dead, and delve even into the teachings of ancient China. All these can contribute something to our understanding of why, where, and how we have lived before. I shall use drawings, use symbols and images to make my task easier. A symbol can convey a meaning that can never be adequately described in words. The snake is one such symbol. Now, I grew up in a land teeming with snakes. Tree snakes, grass snakes, water snakes, black and green mambas, cobras, puff adders. Such was South Africa. I loved their gentle ways and soon saw why it had been adopted as the serpent of expanding consciousness, the snake. We recall such phrases as serpent power, rising up the spine, serpent in the Garden of Eden, winged serpent of South America. When afflicted, it is the symbol of guile and treachery. But far more often, and esoterically, it was the symbol of wisdom and power. It was Aaron's rod. The snake was the symbol of life eternal, the so-called Ouroboros or Ouroboros. Some said that it could hold on to its own tail and form a hoop, thus completing a circuit of life. Thus it is used as the symbol of life eternal, the symbol of continuity, no death, no break in each man's stream of life. The snake does something extraordinary though. It grows too big for its skin, and so it periodically discards it. The skin is totally shed. Even the skin over the eyes falls away. The ancients marveled at this and saw it as yet another sacred message contained in the symbol of the snake. The skin discarding symbolizes the throwing off of the physical body in what we call death. The snake is not obliterated then, and nor are we when we cast aside our worn-out bodies in the act of dying, when we throw off our outermost skin, leaving the soul intact. Let me illustrate something of the attributes of man. The proposition of ancient wisdom is very clear. It says that there is no vacuum in our universe. The whole of space is interpenetrated by a material which Sir Oliver Lodge once termed ether. This very subtle material is found concentrated in the region of planets. In the region of the Earth, for instance, we have the etheric material heavily concentrated, and life forms on the Earth are formed out of this etheric universal substance. So we could say that man himself, living on the Earth in his personality vehicle, is interpenetrated strongly by this etheric material. The etheric forms what is known as the anima mundi of the Earth, a continuum of etheric matter which sustains all life forms on the Earth. When we come to man himself, there are more definite laws which pertain to his nature. His physical body is not the whole story. The physical body of gas, liquid and solid, of fleshy material, is not the story that contains wholeness. The true story is that man has got an etheric body made out of the material that I described earlier and interpenetrating his physical structure. We can trace a lot of this etheric material to subatomic particles, but that is not the subject of my talk here. The etheric body itself is sustained by the energy of what is known as prana. Prana is an energy that streams into our planet from the sun. It is drawn into the etheric body mainly through the respiratory system, which circulates this energy of prana down 3 snake-like tracts, which are called together Ida, Sushumna, and Pingala. These three tracts accept the energy of prana and store it in what are known as chakras, or force centers. These force centers are placed strategically in various parts of the physical body, but they are etheric in nature. There is one in the region of the throat, one in the region of the heart, another in the region of the brow, and then a great 1,000-petaled chakra which encircles and embraces the head region and forms what has been described as the vortex of spiritual energy seen around the heads of saints. Now, this etheric body has a specific function. It is mortal, it is created with the development of the child, and it is lost immediately after death. It takes up the prana of the atmosphere with the respiratory system, and the exercises of the yogis and those who are masters of Tantra Yoga enable the prana to be stored specifically in these chakras and to be fed out from them by thin thread-like processes known as nadis. And so we call the etheric body the vital body of man because it sustains the physical. That is not the end of the matter either. Whereas we have this subtle etheric nature vitalizing us continuously, we also have what is called the astral body. And the astral body is a vehicle made of emotional energy, energy that emerges from what we call today in our science laboratories antimatter. The astral body is the body which supplies energy to our emotional nature. It's the body that we feel in, and it's part of an astral world or globe which interpenetrates the earth right to its core. And it is said that the astral body reaches out into space an immense distance, almost as far as the moon. And in this astral world, whether we are in our physical bodies during the waking state or in our sleeping bodies in the astral state, this astral world is a replica of our physical. That is not our subject here, and I must revert to what is our subject, the components of man. We then must finish the triplicity of man's personality body, vehicle, with what is known as the mental body. The mental body is even subtler than the astral body. The mental body again interpenetrates all the others. It is the vehicle that we think with. It is capable of producing images, thought forms, symbols, and various other devices for conveying meaning by means of mental activity. Together, these various bodies make what we call the lower triad. The lower triad is the personality of man. The higher triad is man's soul. The two are linked together by a channel known as the antakarana. And so the mental body, here shown in green, is that vehicle which is closely related to the monastic body in the soul. The astral body is closely related to the Buddhic vehicle of the soul. And similarly, the physical body is related to the atmic body of the soul. And so these two triplicities are linked, but in the master, that one reaching perfection, they are integrated completely together, making the six-pointed star, the star of perfected man, the Star of David. And so we have now obtained a deeper, a broader understanding of man and his potentials in the light of the energies which he holds in dynamic equilibrium. The soul of man, of course, is immortal. We'll place it here for convenience, and we will say that the soul of man is linked by a bridgehead called the rainbow bridgehead to the structures in man's etheric and astral and mental bodies. When the person is particularly spiritual, then the energies of the soul will flow down the bridgehead, rainbow bridgehead, or if you like, the Hindu term, antakarana, flooding the personality with the soul's glorious qualities, the souls of Atma, Buddhi, and Manas, of truth, beauty, and goodness. And those who paint, those who are our artists, those who are our creative geniuses, the poets, are flooded with the energies of the soul. The energies of the soul act, as it were, like the muses of man. They, together with the energies of the bodies we've described, produce a scintillating vehicle, a globule of energy, which is called man's aura, and in which man lives. The soul is formless. We cannot place a form on it, but if we study the traditional teachings of ancient wisdom, we know that the soul is lotus-like. We know that it is made up of 3 tiers of petals: the petals of knowledge, the petals of sacrifice, and the petals of will. And that as man grows in stature and imbibes his spiritual origins, so these petals of the soul open, unfold. The lotus was, of course, the sacred flower of India and China and Egypt and Greece and even Rome. And it is still venerated today by all the great and ancient cultures. And so when we talk about man's immortality, we suggest that with dying, he progressively throws off his etheric body here in blue. He lives in his astral body for a period in the astral world, in the world of emotion, and then discards his astral form and lives on in his mental body, and the two planes together constitute about 40 years of his afterlife. But that is not the end of the story. Man continues to exist identified with his soul, and in for what is known as a millennium, man will live in the soul world, imbibing its energies, before once again he returns in a cycle that we shall describe later. Rudyard Kipling, the poet, said of those who have died, they will come back. They will come back again as long as the red earth rolls. He never wasted a leaf or a tree. Do you think that he would squander souls? And Robert Browning, formerly the English master, said, "We have other tasks and other lives, God willing." And it was Matanawa who summed up the great cosmic plan in these words: I died as a mineral and became a plant. I died as a plant and rose to animal. I died as animal and I was man. Why should I fear? When was I less by dying? Yet once more I shall die as man, to soar with angels blessed, but even from angelhood I must pass on. So much of our social behavior is based on a false assumption. The assumption that we are worse off by dying. Our doctors make frantic efforts to ward off death from their patients. They submit them to indignities beyond belief. Tubes down the nostrils, ventilators, elixirs, stomach pumps, transplanted limbs, hearts and livers, sometimes with success, but always in the false belief that they are saving the patient. When is anyone less by dying? This question of life after death is paramount in considering euthanasia. Should we keep a grossly deformed child alive at great cost while children in Brazil, perfectly normally formed, struggle to survive, foraging for food in the rubbish dumps of Rio de Janeiro? Unwanted, uncared for, uneducated, and with no chance of fulfilling their dearest hopes and wishes? And then there's the matter of genius. The rationale of genius has never, ever been explained by a university. Certainly not in terms of psychology, philosophy, not even biologically. Twins are often very different without showing any reason why. A brilliant father and a beautiful mother do not necessarily produce a perfect child. As the beautiful blonde said to Bernard Shaw, "Oh, Mr. Shaw, why don't we two get together? With my looks and your brains, what wonderful children we could have." But Mr. Shaw had an answer for her. "Oh, yes, my dear, but what if the child had my looks and your brains?" Yes, we reincarnationists would say it helps to have brains and a nurturing environment, but of paramount importance and genius is the influence of the soul and its ability to retain a faculty or gift earned in a previous life. We only know that in a small percentage of the population there suddenly emerges in the most unexpected locations a genius. It is rare for the average person not to come across a genius sooner or later in the normal course of events. Mozart provides an outstanding example of the phenomena which genius presents. Born with absolute pitch, infallible rhythm and natural comprehension of harmony, at the age of 4 he began to learn to play the clavier, a forerunner of the modern piano, and at 5 picked up a violin and reading at sight staggered through 6 trios with his father and a friend. As a child he read and wrote music before he could do as well with his ABC. At 15 he was the author of 14 symphonies and 6 short operas. Now there's no explanation for the genius of a Mozart, or for that of a more versatile genius like Winston Churchill in terms of orthodox thinking. There is, however, a very good explanation for it once the mechanisms of rebirth are understood. In the case of Mozart, we know that his 2 previous lives were as musicians, and that the period between his life as Mozart and the one immediately preceding was less than 20 years. The boy was able to retain memories of his musical faculties and carry them over into his current life. How else could you explain such matters as genius? Ancient wisdom is all very well, but of what use is it? For me, reincarnation explains away the injustices of life. Those of us who lived through the last war all saw terrible injustices. We saw so frequently the good die young. We saw that those who committed offences against mankind often lived into advanced old age, being unpunished in any way. Let me give you 2 examples of what I mean. The soul of a little girl takes incarnation. The child lives to be only 5 years of age. She dies of cancer of the bowel. She never knows a day on our planet without experiencing severe pain. Now, if there is only one life on earth, where is the justice in that? What chance has that soul had to embrace the many joys and comforts which our planet has to offer? Compare that life with another who incarnates in the body of a boy. The boy is born into a wealthy family. He has education and position in the world. He grows up in a lithesome figure and is handsome of feature. He marries well. Now, where is the justice in this? Compare the 2 lives in the light of Christian teachings, which insists there's only one life for each. Where is the justice? The reincarnationist would avow that we all have many lives on earth. The little girl will certainly have experienced longevity. She has grown up with her family in security and harmony, with friends around her in previous lives. She has known in previous lives the joys of right living, the happiness of a good marriage. Similarly, the little boy in previous lives will, no doubt, have known a cruel death in battle, or at the hands of an assassin. Even perhaps he has died of cancer of the bowel many times. When we recognize that we have many lives on earth, everything is compensated for. There is a law of retribution. Nobody escapes the results of his actions. We call this law the law of karma, whereby good or bad action works its way out. Misdemeanors must be paid for. Kindly acts will reap their appropriate reward. Karma is a sister doctrine to reincarnation. It is a law that is interwoven with rebirth. Our science accepts that laws govern the universe. There are laws that govern water and the flow of sap in the trees. There are laws that govern the planets and their orbits, laws that decide the pressure of the blood, the rising of the tides, the setting of the sun. There are laws for every kingdom of nature and for every aspect of life. Surely then there must be laws for times and ways in which man must be born on earth. And for when he dies, why should birth and death be exempt from law when all else is governed by it? Those who recognize the existence of the soul and pay attention to it soon realize that there are great laws of this universe that must be conceded and worked with. The greatest of these is the law of karma. It is said that even the logos of a planet, or the grand man of the heavens, the logos of this solar system, must bow to the lords of karma, or as the Hindus call it, karma. Not even the Christians could expunge karma entirely from their teachings. Karma is expressed in the Bible in the words, "Whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap." If we have sown the seeds of wrongdoing in a previous life, we must reap the harvest of our actions, either in the same life or in lives to come. The same is true of right action. The good done in previous lives reaps its reward in lives to come. The great law of karma may be seen in the swinging of a pendulum. It's just like one. We set the pendulum in motion. According to the force we put on it will depend the distance to which it will swing. It will swing back to us eventually. effect must follow cause. And so the law of karma can be termed the law of cause and effect. The law of karma puts right what appears to be the results of good action and bad action. We call it justice and injustice. I need not worry if I suffer injustice that cannot be corrected by myself without causing harm to others. I can leave the matter to the inexorable law of karma. There are some who believe in an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. They presume upon themselves the right to act as a lord of karma, an agent of divine wrath, and they do it at their own risk. The life cycle that we saw earlier could be compared to the wheel of a snake, may also be used in terms of a sine wave. The sine wave is a very useful diagram for explaining the process of karma. The soul's journey is a constant one of descent into a physical body, which we see here, and then after a period of living in it, a lifetime, the soul withdraws and returns to the heaven state. And so it constantly takes on life after life. The matter of karma becomes easily understood in terms of the sine wave. If we blind somebody in this life, at this stage of the physical development, we would then say that the blind action, the action of blinding, must be paid for either in this life, or it could wait several lives and be paid for in a life to come. Sometimes we pay through accidents which none may foresee, not even a master. So we see the birth of the concept of diseases like arthritis arising from karmic causes. We call these diseases, in fact, diseases of karmic origin. There are about 100 of them. Edgar Cayce, the clairvoyant, described some of them. It may surprise you to learn how some common disorders are thus related. Arthritis, the rheumatoid type, is a disease arising from karma of long standing, which may require many lives of suffering before the condition is worked out karmically and the person is again free of that condition. Osteoarthritis arises from accidents which damage the joints, and they are the result of karma of short standing, derived from causes in recent lives. Nervous disorders, psoriasis, mongolism, tuberculosis, syphilis, cancer, these are almost always found in those who are disposed to the diseases by their karma. I've described some of these karmic diseases in my book, Esoteric Healing, Part 1. In the case of rheumatoid arthritis, the karmic cause is at the level of the mental body. There has, for many lives, been a rigidity of thinking, the inability to change outlook and attitude in particular. And now, in the current life, and perhaps for many more, the patient is incarcerated in a body that becomes rigid, sore to move, disfiguring, calcifying, crippling. All the signs of crystallizing karma. Only when the mold of rigid thinking is shattered, when the outlook is broadened and made resilient, will the condition of rheumatoid arthritis begin to remit. The patient must cry out to heaven, when will I be rid of this rigidness, rid of this concrete skeleton? Absolute despair and contrition over the fixedness of the mind and of the feelings and of the body must be experienced before the karmic spell is broken. The karma of the Mongol child, what of that? The karma of the Mongol child is that the soul has occupied a series of bodies in which the mental strain has been so intense that there has been mental breakdown. Now the mental body needs resting. A Mongol child's body is adopted by the soul. In it, the physical life can still be expressed, and so can the emotional nature, but the mental body is only functioning slightly, and the permanent mental atoms are able to recoup and adjust. In the mental lives ahead, there will be capacity to deal with mental stress, because the mental body has been rested in this body of the Mongol child. Even the church is beginning to rethink its attitudes on a doctrine accepted by more than half the world's people. The Reverend Leslie Weatherhead in England and others have accepted the doctrine outright. Arthur Shepherd, canon of Worcester Cathedral, for many years said, "A single earth life is inadequate. Understanding the process of reincarnation gives us new hope and understanding about our inadequacies." It was the Buddha who said, "He who toiled as a slave may come anew as a prince, for gentle worthiness and merit won. Who ruled once as a king may wander earth in rags, for things done and undone." All the great religions, not just Buddhism, knew of reincarnation. From the Old Testament we hear, Cain's soul passed into Jethro, Abel's soul passed into Moses. But this is not from the Old Testament as we know it today, but from the Kabbalah, the esoteric version of the Old Testament, still studied carefully by many rabbis who believe it to be the truer version of events. And now, what of metamorphosis? Reincarnation implies spiritual metamorphosis. We have all seen biological metamorphosis in action about us. We have observed the way in which a tiny butterfly egg changes into a caterpillar, the way in which a caterpillar grubs for its existence and grows large and slug-like until it can eat no more and then begins to spin a cocoon around itself. And just when we think it is resting inside the cocoon, it emerges and flies off into the orchard with this tremendous change of the insect from pupa into imago, and we call it metamorphosis. The ancients were fascinated by it, especially the Egyptians and the Greeks. They believed that man was in a process of metamorphosis, of changing from an earthbound caterpillar-like creature into a vastly different entity, an angel or an angelic being, as he moved at death from one kingdom to another, from the fourth kingdom of human into the fifth kingdom of soul. The process of spiritual metamorphosis is beautifully illustrated in the poem that I'm going to read to you. It's called The Caterpillar and the Butterfly. A butterfly rested upon a flower, gay was he and light as a flake, and there he met a caterpillar, sobbing as though his heart would break. It hurt the happy butterfly to see a caterpillar cry. Said he, "Whatever is the matter, and may I help in any way?" "I've lost my brother," wept the other. "He's been unwell for many a day. Now I discover, sad to tell, he's only a dead and empty shell." "Unhappy grub, be done with weeping. Your sickly brother's not dead. His body's stronger and no longer crawls like a worm, but flies instead. He dances through the sunny hours and drinks sweet nectar from the flowers. Away, away, deceitful villain, go to the winds where you belong. I won't be grieving at your leaving, so take away your lying tongue. Am I a foolish slug or snail to swallow such a fairy tale? I'll prove my words, you unbeliever. Now listen well and look at me. I am none other than your brother, alive and well and fancy-free. Soon you'll be with me in the skies among the flirting butterflies." Oh, cried the mournful caterpillar, 'tis clear I must be seeing things. You're only a spectre sipping nectar, flicking your ornamental wings and talking nonsense by the yard. I'll not hear another word. The butterfly gave up the struggle. I have, he said, no more to say. He spread his splendid wings and ascended into the air and flew away. And while he fluttered far and wide, the caterpillar sat and cried and cried and cried. Euston Owen's lovely poem on the butterfly. To summarize what we've had to say here today, the ancient wisdom teaches us there is no death, only change of state. Birth and rebirth are endless until karma is satisfied, and then reincarnation ceases. How like humanity, that caterpillar, weeping and grieving over a dead body, believing that it is the end of everything, whereas it is only the beginning, a transformation of life forms into new forms and greater consciousness. The Greeks knew about the whole matter of spiritual metamorphosis. They called the human soul psyche, and they also called the butterfly psyche, not just by chance, but because they knew the one symbolized the other, the soul psyche and, of course, the butterfly psyche. A Chinese sage with his tongue in his cheek once said, "He who feels punctured must once have been a bubble. He who feels unarmed must have carried arms. He who feels belittled must have been consequential, and he who feels deprived must once have had privilege." Reincarnation teaches us not to depend too much on things material, or, for that matter, we should not attach ourselves to anything in this world without realizing that everything is impermanent. All is eventually swept away to take new form. Out in the deserts of the Middle East, you will often find reminders of this in the huge statues that still remain even in fragments. With what pomp were these mighty forms in granite not erected, and in the belief that they would stand there forever. Forgive me if I read you Ozymandias, a poem about one such piece of granite. I met a traveller from an antique land who said, "Two vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them, on the sand, half sunk, a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor well those passions read, which yet survive stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed." And on the pedestal these words appear: "My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lonely and level sands stretch far away." Shelley's cynical tribute to things material. I end now with Macefield's immortal lines once more. I hold that when a person dies, his soul returns again to earth. Arrayed in some new flesh disguise, another mother gives him birth. With sturdier limbs and brighter brain, the old soul takes the road again. Thank you.
Dr. Baker has spent 40 years of his life studying the ancient wisdom. His tireless efforts to make this knowledge available to all has resulted in the production of nearly 100 books covering virtually every aspect of the esoteric. The Jewel in the Lotus. a valuable introduction into the postulates and teachings of the ancient wisdom. Meditation, a practical guide to the art of communication between kingdoms and the recharging of personality with spiritual energy. Esoteric Healing, 3 volumes covering many aspects of this important subject. It is based on Dr. Baker's own research and medical expertise. Anthropogeny, man is far older than scientific theory would have us believe. This book explores the cosmic origins of man, reaching back to before time itself. Esoteric Psychology, an in-depth study of the 7 rays, how they influence man, and how to analyze one's own rays and those of others. The Psychology of Discipleship, at last a guide for those increasing numbers of people consciously treading the path of spiritual unfoldment, a difficult and arduous task made easier by the knowledge that others have succeeded and left signposts on the way for those who follow. Esoteric Astrology, Dr. Baker has spent 40 years developing a growing understanding of this exacting science. Fast becoming accepted as the astrology of the New Age, these 12 volumes provide a unique basis for a thorough knowledge of esoteric astrology. They teach you to interpret horoscopes and gain an awareness of that most important of subjects, the soul's purpose. These are just a few of the publications available. In addition to this growing number of books, there are 200 live recordings of Dr. Baker's public lectures made during his extensive tours of North America and Europe during the 1970s and 80s. For information about any of these products and for other video lectures, write to the address on the cover of this video cassette.